I'm Fatheree.
This is Dave.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 106th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we talk all about Star Trek all the time. And that includes the animated series, that includes any show of Star Trek, no matter who has tried to ignore it and not appreciate the vast array of Star Trek content that we have. And we are definitely enjoying the kind of renaissance the animated series has gotten in recent years, especially today when we are joined with Aaron Harvey, who I dub the #1 animated series fan. Also,
thank you.
Author or co-author of the official guide to the animated series.
Yeah, that puts him head and shoulders above any other supposed animated series fans.
The man who literally wrote the book on it.
Yeah. That has happened a couple times where somebody's like, I don't think you know this. And I'm like, I literally wrote a book about
it. We're specifically focusing on episodes 12 through 22 of the animated series. If you want to check us out talking about the first 11 episodes, that is available now in Tex-Trek 105, where we were discussing it with the other author of the book, Rich Shepus. But Aaron, whenever we have a new guest on board the Starship Texas, we like to ask you, how did you get into Star Trek? And I'd like to ask, how did you get into the animated series specifically?
I got into Star Trek from my grandfather, who I'm now learning was a bigger science fiction fan than I had known. Doctor Who, even, and back in 1960-something, was pretty rare for an American to be a Doctor Who fan, but he traveled. So he introduced me to Star Trek. And I would sit down and watch TV, and Saturday morning I was like, oh, it's Star Trek. And I'd be very confused that it was a cartoon. And then and whenever I expected it to be a cartoon, it was the live action. When I wanted to be live action, it was a cartoon. I knew nothing about how programming worked then. I'm like, of course at 10 in the morning, it's not going to be a live action Star Trek. So he's really got me interested in it. And then I like drawing and illustration. I mean, we put the book together. That was I got to actually lay it out and everything, so I was very excited about that. So I just followed, art and design and animation, and so it's something that I always knew about. And then in the 80s, without an internet, people are like, "What Star Trek cartoon show? You're crazy. That didn't exist." You get a lot of like, there's no way to prove it to somebody. So it sort of became an obsession of just like making sure that people knew it was still alive. It was a real thing.
Yeah, well, it was something that was kind of swept under the rug for a little bit. There was the Nickelodeon run of the episodes, I guess in the early 90s. But like, other than that, it didn't get talked about very much until the DVDs came out in 2006.
Yep. And people thought it wasn't canon at that point, even until the DVDs, and there was still a bunch of people arguing about that.
Yeah, and I used to be part of that crowd. I used to be a big Gene Roddenberry said it wasn't canon. The Okudas didn't put it in the encyclopedia. And it was actually listening to Trek FM around like 2016, 2017, and discovering your podcast on there, Saturday Morning Treks. And I also I heard you show up on other people's podcasts, and you were always like advocating for the animated series. And I think you showed up on the Women at Warp podcast at one point, talking about how it's actually kind of always been canon. And it would frustrate me.
Gene also said that Star Trek 3 wasn't canon or something like that.
And 5
you kind of like you have to take that with a grain of salt. And also, he had his lawyer whispering in his ear that he wouldn't be taken seriously if he was associated with a cartoon. But what was interesting when we were doing the research, we also found that his lawyer, who was his lawyer back then, got paid like $1,500 an episode. So I don't know why he was all upset about it, because he got paid for doing nothing. So that's
interesting. I didn't know sort of the behind the scenes politicking about the show. Maybe
I think the big reason that it wasn't decanonized, but it was just sort of like, let's not approach it, is that Filmation was going out of business, and so they're selling their assets off. And at the same time, Larry Niven, who did the Slaver Weapon, and that's his universe, was going to start an ARG or an RPG or something, some sort of game, which I don't think ever came to fruition. So they were just like, we don't really want to use these characters or this and have to go to court and deal with all that. You know, we would win, it would be fine, but we just don't want to deal with that. So they asked them, you know, just let's not bring that up. And then slowly it sort of got reintroduced. And after Gene passed away, that sort of his, you know, push to not recognize it had kind of disappeared. And I think immediately afterwards in one of the books, there was a Philosian from
Nice.
The Infinite Vulcan, and then it just went from there. And every series after that has referenced it.
Yeah, like
Somewhat.
DS9, Enterprise, Discovery. Like they keep going back to, or even Picard. We have the Kzinti are brought up.
Yeah,
So,
and they asked Larry
yeah.
Niven about that. That was cool, because we had talked to him as like, hey, would you be willing to go back and revisit this in a Star Trek light? And he's like, yeah. I mean, he's pretty old at this point, so I'm not sure if that's just, you know, on his plate. But I'm really glad that he, you know, gave permission to Frakes to do that. So that was fantastic.
well, I want to thank you for taking time to come and talk to the animated series with us. And you know, it's kind of special for me, because as someone who like listened to your podcast and read your book, I have become a born again Trekkie who now is an evangelist for the animated series, and I will defend that it is as legitimate as anything else, and I will die on that hill. And that was just like something that I flipped around on in the last, you know, 3 or 4 years, and you're a big reason for that. Well,
They officially have said that it is canon, and that
Yes.
it is considered sort of the 4th season of the show. So it's now recognized by the franchise. And then you have the detractors saying, well, I don't recognize that person. So I'm like, whatever. It's on screen. They've used it for referencing, you know, like I always joke that it was sort of the Disney-fied version of what actually happened. It's sort of like if they were to make stories for kids in the Star Trek universe, maybe it would be one of these. So I mean, when people say, "Oh, you know, there's a giant Spock," or it's like, "Yeah, a green space hand." I mean, there's a lot of things in the original series that are just as goofy. And if you had said, you know, if you'd remove that as a original series episode and then said it was animated, they'd be like, "Oh, that's horrible. You couldn't do that." But yeah, so I think you find what you're looking for. You can either find something to say that it's not canon, or you can find something that confirms that it could be canon.
And if you love the original series, if you enjoy that stuff and you don't like the animated series, you're really missing out. And to say it's like, you know, cheap, low budget, not good, you sound as silly as people who say that about the original series.
Yeah, I mean, the animation had limitations because of the speed at which they had to do that, the years that are back then when it was made, and just the budget that they had. And a lot of the money just went to the voice actors. So, you know, I always almost see it as a radio play with some visuals in some ways, because
I kind of like that.
But yeah, no, the backgrounds are amazing. I mean, here's a background here. But
there was a few episodes when I was making my notes on these where I made a point to note some really beautiful matte paintings and or cool looking alien designs. You know, they're not like every single one like a jump out at you winner, but there's some cool stuff in there.
Yeah. I was really happy with the fact that there's some very non-humanoid type creatures, and even though George Takei was quoted as saying, "Oh, they only use humanoids," which I don't think he watched the show. I don't know. But the Survivor, we had the cool shapeshifter. Like I hope that character, that race comes back in a show somewhere. I think it'd be really interesting, because it feels like there's some story that you could pull in, especially into like Picard or something.
Yeah, with the Romulans using a shape-shifting alien. Yeah, that would definitely generate some stories.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go ahead and jump in to Season 1, Episode 12, The Time Trap, written by Joe Perry. And I'll just go ahead and read off the synopsis here that I swiped off Memory Alpha. The Enterprise becomes trapped in the Delta Triangle, an area of space where many starships have gone missing. To make matters worse, the ship also has to defend itself against the Klothos, a Klingon vessel commanded by Commander Kor.
Who we have seen before.
Yes, of Kor of Errand of Mercy, often cited as the OG Klingon, the original.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think this. Oh no, wait. I'm trying to remember if this is the last time that we also see the Klingons until Trials and Tribulations. The original non-bumpy head version.
Oh, yeah. So he was the first smooth-headed Klingon, and then the last smooth-headed Klingon until Deep Space Nine went back in time.
Yeah, and I think we got the third female Klingon that we'd ever seen too.
Oh. But yeah, so this episode is like the Bermuda Triangle of space with a kind of a twist.
The other cool thing here is that the name of the Klingon ship, the Klothos, is also cited in Deep Space Nine as the ship that Kor commanded. So they carry that over, and we get to see a lot of other Star Trek races in the that council,
the Elysian Council.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. There's like a pocket universe that they kind of get plunged into where. All the other sort of survivors, don't they like live an elongated span of time, right? So thousands of years, they're effectively immortal, and they've had to kind of learn to put past their differences past them.
I always wondered like where, they have limited resources, and I suppose unless some ships had like the ability to grow food or whatever, there's no real sun in there. I could there's some scientific things that sort of fall apart when you think about it too hard, but.
Basically it looks like sort of one of those ship's graveyard type things, but I guess all these ships all had like inhabitants, and there was a council and all of that.
Yeah. Or if not all of them have it, they've somehow come together into one space, and all the other ships are just they're scavenging for parts, it looks like.
Did they literally have all of the kind of what I would think of as the iconic Journey to Babel races in there? So there's like Andorians, Orions.
I have a list of them. I have a list. There is an Orion, Vulcan, Gorn, Kazenti, kind of foreshadowing the slaver weapon.
Yep.
Romulan, what looks like what could be retconned as a Xindi insectoid from Enterprise. Tellarite, Klingon, Andorian, one of the plant people from Infinite Vulcan, one of the Aquans that we haven't gotten to yet. Yep. Even though she's orange instead of green. And then we have Megan, the one that can see the future.
Who always talks like this?
Who I thought in Voyager, the Doctor at one point, he mentions there's a race called, I think they're called the Yado from the Beta Quadrant, and they can see the future. And so I'm wondering if we could retcon that as her species.
Could be. It's like, who knows where this pocket universe connects to too. So it could be all over the quadrant or over the galaxy.
It's the thing you see a lot in the animated series is they cross over into other universes with a little bit more frequency than other Star Trek shows, where you just kind of have the Lazarus antimatter universe and the mirror universe. And that's kind of it. In the animated series, they're like, here's the backwards time universe, and here's the time pocket universe, and here's the Megas 2 universe where magic works.
No, I love this episode for like just some of the fact that those ships, the hundreds of ships that you see in the background, were all ships that were their steps getting to the very first episode, the pod ship. It was Bob Klein. That was
the one where he like did all, like Gene Roddenberry said, draw it again or whatever.
And
Oh,
those
man.
and the reason that it looks so great that it's populated with all these ships is those are all of those ships. So you can kind of see his process of going from, old Starfleet vessel to, organic alien ship. Just by putting those all together, you probably could figure out what the progression is. So, and it's
yeah,
got
no, that's cool. I did not know that. I guess I thought that I think I thought that they were just unused designs from the show. I didn't know that it was made up of stuff from that literally one ship design, just many incarnations.
Well, they're unused. So, well,
I guess so. Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, no, it was like, and there's a couple pretty cool ones in there. We put one of them in I think it's in the first chapter of the book, in the first episode. That's sort of like a freighter. It was, I think, after the Bonaventure, but before it moved over into being alien. And just, I think there's some really cool concepts in here. And then Mike Okuta's favorite Star Trek ship is the robot grain ship. That's what they retconned it into the live action. So that was pretty cool.
We should talk about the Bonaventure.
Because everybody hates that ship. So my friend Lonnie and I took it and we did a 3D version of it and sort of brought it into what, if it was real, what would it look like? And
right.
It's not horrible. The pylons are a little high for what they are, but we sort of, it's a good little frigate basically. And you have to kind of take the timeline that they give with a grain of salt because, we now have, after 45 years after that of Star Trek canon. So it can't be the first ship with warp drive. It can't even be the first ship with warp drive in TAS because in the last episode, we have Dr. April as the first physician on a ship with warp drive. And that doesn't make sense either. It's one or the other. But so we're thinking it's the first ship with modern warp drive, and which is what Dayton Ward has done in some of his books when he's referenced it. So it's sort of like the first warp 7 drive. And I'm imagining it's kind of like in that era of the NX-01 refit, because it's got bits and pieces of the refit sort of look like that. And then we learned that Doug Drexler actually had looked at the Bonaventure and kind of pulled some cues from that. So okay, cool.
We should talk about the Klingons and the crew of the Enterprise having to work together. And it's kind of silly, but it looks like something you would do as a kid playing with toy ships when they hook their ships
them together.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that is like a little groove for the Enterprise to fit into a D7. It's kind of perfect.
The ships can be put together to form a super fortress.
That's when it could have turned into Transformers.
Yeah. I like that Core is, gonna stab them in the back, and the.
But I was thinking, there's several episodes over the course of Trek, and maybe was it Star Trek Undiscovered Country that. In some ways, our stories, little allegories about the East and the West sort of having to cooperate and find some sort of unity. But this is definitely one where the East tries to stab it in the back, the West in the back. So it wasn't quite as, as idealistic as some of Gene's other stories. Not that he wrote it.
The speech that Kirk goes on to, where he says that it's worth dying to get back home because even with all of its flaws, it's still important to them. It's kind of like Jeffrey Hunter as Pike in The Cage, where it's I got to take reality over the. Yeah, this is kind of peaceful and kind of cool, but I need the real deal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think you expect the Klingons to do that anyway. So I feel like they were sort of ready for that in some way.
Yeah, and then their scheme of Spock acting weird and
all
friendly
chummy and putting hands around that was very strange.
Shall we move on to episode 13? And I always say this one wrong, but the AMBERGRIS element.
AMBERGRIS.
AMBERGRIS. Yeah, I can never get that right.
It's
Written by Margaret ARMEN.
Yes.
And this one, the crew of the Enterprise explore a submerged culture on a water world. This is basically where Spock and Kirk turn into Aquaman and the Submariner.
It literally uses stuff from the Aquaman Filmation show. There's some scenes where they're swimming. Yeah, it was kind of cool. They used the same swimming macros, I guess, if it was a computer, and just copied it that way. Sufficient. Yes. This is all we get the Aqua Shuttle too.
Yeah.
Is awesome.
And the Aqua Shuttle is a neat design. I'm glad you brought that up because like the shuttlecrafts in the animated series are so like when you see Mud go into the shuttle bay a few episodes ago and you see all those cool shuttles, it's like, oh, I want to see those shuttles like flying around doing stuff. We'll talk about the Copernicus in a moment and the slaver weapon, but
people complain it's like, oh, that could never fit into the the Delta Flyer couldn't fit inside a Voyager either, but it was there. So I think there's sometimes you just have to kind of give things a pass.
Basically, Kirk and Spock are transformed into these aquatic life forms, and they meet the species of the Aquans, who that have a very fitting name, as they're quite literally aquatic people.
Yes.
It's all starting to come together.
Very convenient. Maybe it's the universal translator. It's just finding something that it's like matches.
Hey, that's true. It just might just be very on the nose, that translator.
Yeah. In Discovery, we have Kelpians who eat kelp, and it's kind of like the same amount of logic. So
I was like, really? Come on.
You know, I was thinking that in Star Trek, usually if the transformation isn't something that's immediately like life-threatening, like, you know, they're aging or whatever, that a lot of times, you know, it's meant to sort of bring some sort of insight or cultural knowledge or whatever. And that is kind of what goes on here. I mean, aside from, I think they must have mainly done it for cool visuals, but it definitely is like, it allows them to kind of like go and sort of try and bridge the gap with this culture, which happens to be having a very Earth-like, what do you call it, generation gap between the sort of the elders and the youth culture who are sort of more open-minded about the strange visitors.
Are you saying old people are more racist?
I'm saying they're saying old people are more racist, but also yes. No.
You know, I thought that Margaret ARMEN, who wrote this episode, she also wrote the Lorelei Signal and a couple of TOS episodes, the Gangsters of Triskelion and the Cloud Miners, I think one other. I like everything she's written. She must have been fairly young. Paradise Syndrome, there we go. I like all those episodes. Even the Paradise Syndrome is kind of not aged all that gracefully, but I still enjoy it. I thought that she must have been like under 40 when she was writing this. And like, no, she was like in her 50s when she's writing that like old people are dumb and like young people know better. But I think that's kind of like a good message in a way. Like I'm in my mid 30s and I kind of look at how like people older than me vote compared to people younger than me vote. And it's like, yeah, I kind of have to side with the youth on a lot of this stuff.
Well, the 60s were like which this was just getting past, was like maybe the first time I think the country became sort of acutely aware of, like, even without judgment, that there was a, you know, very stark difference of not became aware, they knew it, but that it became a topic of conversation in the national spotlight. Right. And certainly Vietnam would have put that, you know, front and center.
Yeah, it definitely felt like it was sort of a fragment of the 60s in some ways, like at the end in the, you know, beginning of the 70s. There was a very kind of a hippie type feel to it.
Well, this kind of also this one has an environmental message, you know, more or less. Yeah. As I was watching this episode, there was a line that I wrote down, and it's lensed through sci-fi terminology because they use, what do they call their sort of commandments or whatever? Ordainments.
Yeah.
And one of them, I think this is one of the younger ones when they're trying to figure this situation out. He says, ordainments are useless in times of turbulence. Only knowledge will help us. And I was like, hey, there's a message that I feel like is as timely as it was in 1970 or 71. Or no, I'm sorry, 73 or 74.
It's kind of sad that some of the stuff keeps coming back and we don't seem to be learning from it. You know, when the 1973 cartoon can tell you things. It's like, come on.
The wisdom of the Aquans still shines through.
Yeah.
But how many Saturday morning cartoons in the 70s will still have these timely messages decades later? Like, this is a little bit...
Very few of them.
Yeah, this is a little bit more sophisticated than the shows coming on immediately before or after it.
Well, and if you're talking about racism, some of the shows, just the way they treated people of other races, cartoons were just like a little cringy or a lot cringy. You know, like even like Hong Kong Phooey and stuff like that, where it's just like,
for sure.
yikes, okay. Where it was great because you saw, Sulu and Uhura and everybody just treated as a person. There wasn't like some sort of special thing that they were given because, that was the black character or the Asian character. So,
and they added a few. We get Lieutenant Gabler, we get Ensign Walking Bear, who we'll talk more about in a moment. Oh, and this episode also gave us the Sur Snake, and it kind of continues a trope in the animated series of there's a lot of monsters that are either kind of like bird or bat based, or they're kind of like serpent or dragon based.
Yep.
I think they look pretty cool. I mean, like it's a slightly weird maybe fixation, but I like what the work their designers did. It reminded me of some of the sort of stuff from like, I don't know, I guess those Hanna-Barbera cartoons like the Herculoids or Johnny Quest type creatures and stuff. And I did like this episode visually, by the way, even if it's kind of on the sillier front of things, maybe. It's kind of a fun breakup of the usual away team mission.
And it was one that used to bother me when I was a TAS hater. I was like, you can't have like Kirk and Spock turn aquatic and go swim around with fish people. But now I'm like, why? Like this, it's not that crazier than anything any other show would do. And it's kind of cool that we could see like a big budget idea. Like, like a live action Aquaman movie was very expensive. Ask James Wan. So like instead they just did this as in an animated format, which is kind of the only way we could have had it.
It's probably no weirder than Janeway becoming a lizard.
Yeah, that I don't know if that's the best comparison that we should make, but
cut to the chase with not not so great example.
Well, instead of lizard people, we should talk about cat people and the slaver weapon.
Yay!
Written by Larry Niven, the writer of the story it was based on, the soft weapon, and
pretty esteemed sci-fi writer.
Yes. Yes.
Like legendarily so.
A group of Kzinti divert the shuttle Copernicus and retrieve a newly discovered slaver weapon. This is a very weird synopsis because if you don't know what a Kzinti or slaver weapon is, it doesn't tell you anything.
Not a very good. No.
This is my favorite episode of the animated series.
Really?
I put this over Yesteryear.
I like this, but Yesteryear wins, and also I take a few points off for certain reasons, which I'll get to at the end. How about?
Well, it's also the only episode not to have Kirk in it.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the very cool things about it.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like Kirk, but
it's cool to give Sulu and Uhura more spotlight.
Yeah, people, if they're watching the video of this, they might see Aaron's Kirk as a jerk badge and just think, like, what kind of campaign is he mounting here? And in fact, it is a very specific episode reference. He may also be mounting a campaign against Kirk. I don't know. But it goes to the, what was the episode? Not prankster, but the practical joker. Yeah.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to it.
We'll get to it.
But yeah, no, the Kzinti, if you remember from the Time Trap, they looked a little different, kind of more like a fuzzy teddy bear kind of thing. And it was because they had a reference image given to them that turned out to be fan art. So they didn't really want to continue with the design that wasn't necessarily based off of something they did. So they sort of revisited the description of the Kzinti and sort of did it based on their own ideas.
Yeah, one of the Time Trap looks pretty weird, and he's not wearing a shirt. I don't know if he's wearing pants or not, but then you can say that about all those council members. I don't know if they're wearing pants or not. They're all kind of like trussed up. Like
this is our pandemic era of Zoom chats.
Exactly. But yeah, the design that they have here looks really cool, and I like that they're just kind of like ugly. They kind of have like that rough look to them.
They're like scraggly cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially the psychic, the guy
telepath,
the telepath, yeah. He's just tired.
They're all unhappy neurotics, which I think a telepath would actually be kind of like stressed out and miserable because you have all these other thoughts in your head.
Well, I feel like pound for pound, this episode just has more creative ideas than any other episode. I feel like it's beyond the shadow of a doubt. There's just some cool notion or throwaway line that's a neat premise about a reveal about the Kzinti, the slavers, this ancient race that doesn't quite necessarily fit Star Trek thing, like canon, because didn't they supposedly, like, once in eons past, rule over the whole universe, galaxy.
The galaxy, but it was 1 billion years ago, so it would
right, and then like
everything.
Was it in overthrowing them that it kind of set like the galaxy back to zero? Like there was like so much loss of life.
Yeah, I mean we've had those ideas. You know, there's the Cedar, the people who you know, populated everything. We've got in Picard. Apparently the you know, the biomechanical, the AI probably have destroyed some galaxy. You know, so I think there's precedence for it. It just depends on where in the timeline it fits. It's like it could be like, what is it? You know, extinction level event for Earth. It's kind of the equivalent of that for the galaxy.
Yeah.
Right.
Starts over with a new.
It would be crazy if they ever did reference this on, say, another episode of Picard or something like that, from the remnants from before the Slaver Wars or whatever.
I think it'd be cool to do that. It'd be so easy. It wouldn't be that different from bringing up the Iconians or the
Maybe they'll bring it up in their far-flung future, whatever's happened in the next season of Discovery. So let's just say like one or two plot things. They introduced the slavers, who were this very powerful race who had these, what they call them, slaver boxes?
Stasis boxes.
Stasis boxes, yeah. Real simple idea, but they basically are a box where there's like, their time does not flow within it. And it's kind of a cool premise. I don't know exactly why they've done this, but they've got all these boxes, or not all of them, but they have some of them scattered throughout the galaxy that have either like weapons or technology in them, and you can sometimes, if you find them, it's a good thing and it like catapults tech forward, and sometimes it's like a trap and like you blow up the world or whatever.
Yeah, supposedly the gravity plating is based off of something they found in like a flying belt or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and that totally fits into canon. You can easily say that, like, oh yeah, like early Vulcans or whoever, the first people to like really popularize gravity plating, like found it in a stasis box.
Yeah.
And so our exploratory crew, which is what Spock, Uhura, Sulu.
It'd be interesting if Chekhov was there.
Yeah. Can't say the names. Those three, they find one and then are sort of lured into a trap by the Kzinti, who have an empty other one.
Yeah, because the boxes, the only way to find a stasis box is with another stasis box, because it's sort of like a compass, or it tells you which direction to go find the next one.
The slavers seem like they really like messing with people.
Yeah, I was saying that doesn't seem like the best system if you actually want. Maybe they weren't meant to be found. I don't know.
As a dramatic device, though, it's a lot of fun, because the whole episode ends up being about the Kzinti wanting to test the captured weapon out. This ancient slaver weapon, and like, so it's all sort of guesswork as to what they meant to do with it, what their culture was, how they would have designed the weapon, and it almost like the episode works on its own rules, even if you kind of don't know if the slavers and the stasis boxes seem a little weird. It works as this really cool dramatic device.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the best written episodes of the animated series. It really utilizes that 24-minute format. You get so much story, you get so much character with the Kzinti and Chuffed Captain and the telepath. You instantly figure out who each one of them is just in like that very little dialogue we get from each one.
Yeah.
I feel like they have the coolest ship name too.
The Traitor's Claw, yeah.
The Traitor's Claw. Hell yeah.
And just even like some of the little dialogue stuff when the Chuffed Captain is using the weapon, he's looking at the telescope. He's like, "Oh, finally built telescope. They were fine builders, these slavers." Just like the fact that they would take time to just show you his thought process, things he would appreciate, stuff like that. I thought it was really cool. Obviously, like Larry Niven has put a lot of thought into the species he created, and he was able to squeeze that into every word of the script has some of that Kzinti backstory packed into it.
There's also the fresh meat, and I just think if you could use that for Amazon Fresh, you could just like deliver stuff without, and you can just put it in a stasis box and deliver it to your door.
Or deliver any type of food.
Yeah, hot pizza, it'd just be like frozen in time right there.
The slavers can definitely repurpose their conquering nature for a capitalistic society.
Capitalism, exactly.
I like the idea that the Kzinti, like, they hate the thought of vegetables because they're cats, they're carnivorous.
Right.
They're super carnivores.
Which is interesting because my cat eats grass, so I don't know what type of cats those cats are.
I don't know if your cat is like my cat, but when my cat eats grass, it's a prelude to him throwing up.
Oh,
They do seem to use it as a cleanse.
True.
But yeah, the Kzinti are like the hardcore side of cats that's very predatory. And they're culturally, they think Vulcans are lame because they as vegetarians, and they don't really go much beyond assessing them than their dietary qualities. And Sulu or Spock, I think, instructs Sulu to like think vegetable eating thoughts to throw off their telepathic scans. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I like that. I feel no pressing need to talk to an eater of roots and leaves. It's like
beautifully phrased.
If ever have like a vegan that won't shut up about like their diet and they're trying to like convert you to their veganism, just tell them that.
Yeah, you ought to just hold on to that, Fatheree.
But I'm also like,
that's hilarious.
Don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at me. But like, I'm not like the world's biggest cat person. Like. I know that's a very unpopular thing to say, but it's like I kind of like the idea like the Kzinti is like they're kind of when cats are assholes sometimes like that's what the Kzinti feel like to me is they're kind of like oh yeah like all like that assholey side of cats that is this bad guy Star Trek race.
No wonder this is your favorite episode, Fatheree. I did want to bring up, though, like, although I thought they were really well thought out, I thought that, there's one or two of my criticisms here. I thought that their kind of their particular sexism is a little tropey. Like, even by then, we had seen many sort of very patriarchal races. And the way Spock reminds Uhura, he's like, do I need to remind you that their women are dumb animals? Is a little blunt and kind of harsh. I didn't like that.
It was a little mansplaining to somebody.
Yeah.
Like being like, yeah, okay, you're not really making a good impression with your comment. Not being very supportive of your crewmate.
What I liked here was that when Spock does mention to Uhura, like, they're all dumb animals. So if you don't remind them that you're intelligent, they'll probably think you're a dumb animal too, or something like that. But what I like about it is that after he says that, they cut to Uhura, and she's just kind of like sarcastically like, "Oh, thanks." And I like the fact that they gave her like that eye roll kind of reaction to it. It to me, like, it felt like they were acknowledging that, like, that's obviously like a problematic viewpoint, and then that's how they kind of turn that against the Kzinti.
Thanks very much. Whatever she's exactly.
Star Trek, the animated series is not. It doesn't have like always the most sophisticated dialogue, but I like sometimes with their humor and like sarcasm, they definitely do go a little bit farther than other shows of the era as far as giving people some nuance and a little bit of sarcastic sting sometimes I do like that.
And the ship, I'm a ship person, so I can always bring up the ships in the episodes.
Right on.
The Trader's Claw, apparently Dorothy contacted Larry and apologized for everything being pink and the ship being pink. And when we talked with Larry, he's like, I didn't have a problem with that. And I was like, I went back and I reread Ringworld before we spoke with him, and they actually described the ships, which was written like 2 years before TAS, as pink.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm like it is supposed to be that color. So he's like, and there's a lot of those colors on the planet and stuff like that. He goes, so I didn't have a problem. He's like, it seemed to fit the universe that I was creating. So I'm like, okay. So it's really interesting who remembers what about, Dorothy will say one thing because I think for her it was still Star Trek and exciting, but it still was a job. It was sort of, this was the stepping stone to, because she left after the first season. She was going on she wanted to do live action TV. This was just sort of an interim, step to further her career. And other people were just like, Star Trek, this is my life, and this is what I really want to do. So I think the memories that people have of, like you were saying before, if it's just a job and you ask somebody 50 years later what I'm like, I don't know. It's like I colored something in and that was all I remember, so.
Yeah, Rich mentioned in the previous episode that the voice actor, I think, for young Spock in Yesteryear was it's like we sort of all felt it was a moving performance, and he was like, I was just saying the lines.
Yeah. Well, he also didn't, like, some of it was just like, I didn't get any direction. I was a new I was, because he was a kid, he was like, I'm new to all this, and I'm like, all right, I'll just read it. And he goes, I think it's because like his slight nervousness and everything just made the lines that he was supposed to say sound genuine. And then the fact that they just used the recording without telling him, it's just like, nope, we already got it. And like, what? That has to be confusing for like an 11-year-old. It's like,
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
This also, before we move on, this is the only episode where anyone dies in the animated series.
Yeah.
The Kazinti that get blown up. Like,
it's got a kind of I don't want to say a sort of a dark heart, but a little bit of one. And I think as when I was a kid watching the somewhat sanitized cartoons of the 80s, they liked their action adventure, but for sure they like made a point. Like I guess in the 60s and 70s, Johnny Quest could maybe kill off a bad guy, but weirdly G.I. Joe couldn't in the 80s. Right. And so I remember I would see episodes like this, and I would be like, oh man, that's hardcore. This is cool as hell. And like, it's a slightly juvenile take on it, but like, it's not like it's done juvenile in the episode. It's just kind of got some bite to it. And I did appreciate it. Ultimately, the Kazinti destroy themselves with this.
And at the very end, they're sort of like, well, that's what happens. Ha ha ha. And fly away. And you're like, wow, okay, that's a little harsh, but all right.
Mr. Spock, I think you're getting more human every day.
Oh, but Spock definitely like grew as a leader compared to Galileo 7 to this. And I kind of like that you see him as like a better commander. He's a step closer to being Captain Spock in The Wrath of Khan.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, like were the show to have gone on, I would have loved to have seen more episodes like this that would zero in on smaller groups like that, just see how they work in different mixtures.
Yeah. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations, maybe.
There you go.
To coin a phrase.
Let's talk about episode 15, The Eye of the Beholder, written by David P. Harmon. Beaming down to a planet to search for the crew of a missing ship, the crew is captured by its alien inhabitants. And this is the one with the slug elephant zookeepers.
Yeah, it's a classic kind of Star Trek and other sci-fi premise of a world that's a sort of alien zoo that they have to puzzle it out over the course of the episode, but that's the premise. Am I correct? This is the guy who was the writer for the Deadly Years and A Piece of the Action, two pretty damn cool episodes of
Yes, I believe
TOS.
So. Yep. This has a very Cage feel to it too.
Yeah,
in some ways.
For sure. I like this episode more than I expected to, because I'm like, oh god, it's another zoo episode. But I think the fact that we kind of see the landing party making these, what I thought were pretty smart deductions, and sort of using their the follow through was what set it apart. Is the way they figure out that they're in a zoo by the weird terrain placement and all that stuff, and how what they do to get the attention of their zookeepers. And how they telepathically, the fact that they know that they're being scanned, they use it to manipulate them. I was like, oh, these are all kind of cool ideas.
Yeah.
And I like when Junior gets beamed up.
Yeah, I would say that's one of my favorite parts. Just like Scotty and this like kid, basically.
This is one of their very non-human aliens.
Yes. Yep.
Take that, George Takei.
But not very unearthly, I guess. And it does feel like something that you might find in a Amazon jungle or something like that at a much smaller scale, obviously. For sure. Yeah, they I feel like I've seen GIFs of this floating around online of the thing where they're being carried by them, and it can't help but look funny, where they're just standing there having normal conversations, wrapped up in a tentacle, gliding over the landscape. Yeah. It is, and what got me is I've always wanted to see the Ares, the ship that is in orbit, I'm assuming somewhere, that they beam down. Like, and why did they all beam down? Like, I know it must have been like a small research ship or something, but it feels like there's protocols for them to have not done that.
Yeah,
that was the one thing where I'm like, that ship isn't very smart.
It could have been like the size of the Copernicus from the Slaver weapon. It could have been like that small, long-range shuttle. I want an Eagle Moss of the Copernicus.
I've been very much trying to get anyone to do models of the animated series stuff. So that may happen one day.
I think it will.
They're in the zoo or whatever, and the aliens, I think, do they think faster than humans? Like, they're really way advanced. But Kirk and the crew figure out how to get like the kid alien to give them, is it the communicator?
Right.
Yeah.
By like
medical kit.
Yeah, they need the medical kit because they've got an injured person, they right. So they think about it until they just think about the medical kit, and so that the kid will think it's food or something for them, and he hands it to them. I was thinking about how like pets, although not of human intelligence that we have, they know how to manipulate us just like that. My cat, when he wants food in the morning, he will knock over things and make a ruckus until I get up. He understands on some level how to manipulate me.
That's a Kazenti move. Moon pie.
That is not strictly a cat's thing. I have seen that from all animals. They are smart.
No, for sure. Yeah, they problem solve and they remember patterns.
And small children.
It is kind of funny though that like that other crew member was going to die, and these supposedly very advanced aliens didn't really get that.
Yeah, I didn't either that, or they were just so busy with all of their other.
I mean, yeah, obviously they were meant to, and there's a frequent sci-fi idea that some race that's as advanced to us as we are to insects, and so the same way we wouldn't worry about like, oh, there's an ant dying over there, they were probably like, eh.
Yeah. If you have a sick ant in your ant farm, then what are you really going to do about it?
Although they only had 3 or something like that, so it was just like that's 6, I guess, when they got everybody else.
I would give that ant a med kit.
Yes.
and then beam it up to my ship.
Is it weird to y'all that Kirk says a captain must follow the book when he's like kind of the ultimate rule breaker?
Oh.
They were kind of. It's interesting is that every once in a while it feels like they were kind of a little bit of two minds about that. In the original version of what do you call it? Most famous City on the Edge of Forever. In Harlan Ellison's screenplay, Spock had to be the cold person who stopped either, I guess, Kirk from saving. What's her name? Her character's name?
Edith Keeler.
But as it happened, they had it as Kirk stopping McCoy. And that seems like that's weirdly Kirk kind of playing by the book. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm like, here Harlan Ellison had clearly told a story that conceptually was diametrically opposed. It was like, I will sacrifice the whole world for love. And here was a Kirk who was like, nope, she has to die. And I love City on the Edge of Forever, but I certainly can see the, as filmed, but I see that. And I think Kirk, the walking pile of books Kirk that we also see described versus the kind of the lover that we come to know him as in some ways, that sometimes they are of two minds on Kirk. They may have just done it because it was convenient.
I have had a hard time imagining the walking pile of books version of Kirk. I'm like, there's nothing that ever, like, he might be really smart. He might be like, but there's nothing that strikes me as like the nerdy type or whatever. There's just like that. It doesn't feel like that's an honest appraisal of that character. He would
have had to have really come out of his shell in college if that was the case. Like night and day.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about episode 16, The Jihad, written by Stephen KANDEL, who also wrote, I guess you could call it the Mud trilogy, the 3 previous Mud episodes. This is a kind of a different type of story than the Mud stuff. The Vidala, the oldest known spacefaring race, summons Kirk and Spock to recover the Soul of Skor, a stolen religious artifact that has the potential to ignite a holy war across the galaxy. And boy, oh boy, would you not call an episode The Jihad in this day and age.
No. Yeah.
You know what?
It might be somebody's first introduction to what that word meant, though.
I would imagine so. Did they define it in the episode? Did somebody say they might start a jihad or holy war?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that they probably did.
I learned this word from reading Dune novels in a pre 9/11 world.
It's all over Dune.
Yeah. But this is going to be an unpopular opinion, and I fully admit that Yesteryear is a much better episode, but this is probably my second favorite episode of the animated series.
Interesting. Bold words, sir.
I love that it allowed itself to be a Saturday morning adventure cartoon. That, like, yeah, there's definitely some comparisons to like Herculoids, but also like some of the stuff that would come later in the 80s, like He-Man or even like Thundercats. I love like this cast of colorful characters. You know, each one looks like they could make a toy of them. They get in this cool vehicle. It looks like you could make a toy of that.
Yeah,
and
we actually mentioned that on the
fun.
podcast. Adam and I are like, that was so toyetic. It's like if it could just
Toyetic.
be, yeah, that's a term. So if you could just, we always wanted somebody just to do like a 3D printed version of or something of that, like just pretend it was a 70s toy. But the Vidalian Land Rover or whatever it was called.
Actually, I don't know if they ever did this. I don't think they did. I know they made a lot of Star Trek figures in the 90s, but specifically based on the animated series, kind of colorful look would be kind of a fun. That'd be a fun line of toys.
Yeah, really
especially, and then they could have like play sets or whatever. Slaver weapon play set.
Yeah.
With what do they call it?
Or this one could have like the
web.
Volcanoes, the Mad Planet.
Yeah.
Like, you know, add soda, baking soda, and vinegar, and you can have like your own volcano.
Because
This,
Gene Roddenberry wanted volcanoes.
Yes,
This was
and
kind of
everything.
like a. Oh yeah, that's right. This was kind of like also I would say slight Mission Impossible vibes. There was like a bunch of different specialist aliens who were sent on this mission. I was not 100% clear on why they needed to do the mission with a small specialist team like this, but I know they were trying to keep it undercover.
Right.
But it also felt to me like a D&D game where you put together the party and there's a rogue and there's a wizard and there's a and there's a fighter.
The score to me felt very Klingon, or what became Klingon in TNG. Just the whole idea of the trying to bring back the warrior way and stuff like that. It had elements of that to me.
Yeah, for sure. That was it's an interesting notion, and I think I would have found it fairly potent, especially if I had seen it at a younger age. There's this guy who was like wanting to start a war just to redeem the honor of what he had seen as like a slipped out of their pride race. I forget exactly why. Basically, they had become a peaceful race, and he just thought that they didn't have any more victories to win, or what was the deal?
What was the Next Generation episode in season 1, Heart of Glory, where those Klingons are like, yeah, we need to be like warriors and fight the Federation again. It's kind of like that.
Yep. Except they wanted to fight everyone in the galaxy, I think.
I like that Char was his name.
Yeah.
And he betrays them, so it has like that cool melodramatic plot point where it's like, oh no, he was a traitor all along.
You know, as a kid, I loved stories about traitors. But like, I think part of it was like, I sometimes liked if there was some heroic streak to them. So Boromir in Lord of the Rings is like the ultimate example. And I was like, oh, his character resonates. He's trying to be noble, but he failed. And there's at least something of that to the guy in this too.
Yeah.
And he's the same Birdman species that we see in Yesteryear.
I thought you were going to say it's the
not,
same.
Though.
Oh, he's not?
Say he's the same Birdman species as Boromir.
Because I thought okay. Aaron Harvey's correcting me. I thought they were both the same species.
No,
Yeah, go
and
on.
The Aurelians are what are in the Yesteryear, and these are the store, and they look like they're related. And I think in some of the books that people have like said they're from like the same offshoot species, but I do not know why they didn't just make them the same species. That would have made more sense. It would have been like also, oh, we already saw one of these people. He was a historian working with Starfleet. You know, they're peaceful. They're part of the Federation. And then this person's trying to reignite that war. I think that would have been more impactful. But they just made him a different species who looks slightly different if you look at the models next to each other.
Well, that's fitting because Sword, the lizard man, also looks kind of like a Gorn, but not quite.
You got a
And
tail,
like the
right?
lizard people in BEM as well.
Yeah. I feel sorry for Sword because he's kind of cool. He's the one person of this group I'd want to hang out with. Like, he's not a traitor. He's not like trying to like bang Kirk every 5 minutes.
Kirk gets harassed in this.
Yeah, he's not a coward.
Makes memories.
But he doesn't do anything. He helps Kirk push a rock to like block some lava, and that's kind of like all he does. When they're climbing into the fortress, he's like, I'm not built to climb on this type of stuff.
He's got a cool voice though. He's got a cool voice and a cool look, and in a way, and he acts tough. And in a way, that was like enough. Like certainly, when you think about this as like an '80s adventure cartoon style, that was enough as a kid for me to say I like this guy.
I would want that toy.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's the He-Man character that you want because he's just like his tail would smack you or something like that.
Hell yeah. That said, I don't think I have the fondness that you do for the episode, Father. It was all right, but
for me, I like it feels because of how weird it is.
Yeah, it is weird. To me, it's also one of those like, this was only 25 minutes. Okay, it feels like an hour and a half. I don't know. There's something that it drags a little for me. It's like, I don't know if it's just.
There's a lot of slow advancing lava.
Yeah, there's a lot of slow advancing, period. And if you think about it too hard, you're like, what, did he just lead them to where it was? Why couldn't he have just flown off on his own and then hit it or whatever? Like, there just seems like a lot of, I don't know. I also really would like to have seen them play with the whole idea that like the landscape seemed to shift and there was something with time. And because when they get back to the ship, they've been gone for like a minute. And it's just like, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, but it was a sort of a throwaway bit.
Yeah. And the score, or not the score, but the Vidalian looks an awful lot like the cat doctor in Lower Decks, which I know is supposed to be Acacian, but she's hunched over and more scraggly, looks way more like that.
Dr. Tiana.
Yeah, which is like a Vulcan for some reason. There's
a lot of cat stuff in the animated series, too. You have Emrys, and you have the giant cat in Return to the Shore Leave Planet. You have the Kapalan Power Cat we'll get to in a minute.
Yep. Sci-fi writers are cat people.
But the Vidala themselves, if I ever... Like, I don't run RPG games. I just kind of casually dabble in playing in them. But if I was going to run a Star Trek RPG game, I would start it with the Vidala are assembling a crew of people to go on some type of, like, weird mission.
I may have to use that sometime in the future. Yeah, they could also have a Vidalia as the DM, like or something like that.
Yeah, the character in this episode, M3 Green, is that right?
Yep.
He was voiced by triple writer David Gerald.
Oh, which one was he?
The SAG card.
The little green bug.
The cowardly rogue.
Yeah.
Who I kind of love that. Way that he played him, the voice that he used, where he's like so pathetic. It's like, I just hate this wimp. He's this spineless coward. He's like, just leave me here in the blizzard. Let me die.
I liked him.
And apparently he did not like the voice. He was like, when he goes, I finished recording it, and then I was like, I've got a much better voice, and they wouldn't let him do it over again.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm sure, everything was just like, got to keep it moving.
Yeah.
There's
Orion's fine. Keep going.
Typical of the writing on the show is like there's a little bit of nuance even in the sometimes larger than life characters, and so at the end when he's somewhat to some degree proven himself, he's like I'm not even scared anymore. He's like, what does he say? Does he just want to die or?
Yeah. He's like, just leave me, just let me die. He's basically suicidal at that point.
Yeah, he's kind of, but it's an interesting bit of nuance to have him at least show an arc and move past it, and yet still not be able to move past it. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I just love that they're like, no, we need you. We won't let you die.
Shut up and pick the lock.
Kirk isn't like, you have so much to live for, or like, no, like you need to fight for life. He's just like, no, we need you. Come on, I'm not gonna let you die.
I mean, of the many team type of stories, that's more close to like a Dirty Dozen kind of approach, which I'm sure all of those thoughts at least were somewhat on the writer's mind. All those different that Mission Impossible and everything
like a lot
else.
of tropes glued together. Yeah, that's like there's bits and pieces. But yeah, no, it's a fun adventure, and I feel like this is, if they had like the hour format, that they could have probably done something like a subplot or something. Like if they had something to cut to, if like cut to the ship or something like that. If there was something back and forth, that probably
like a little bit of a B plot.
Yeah, and that's where I think the few times that the animated series could benefit for a slightly longer format. I think it does a really good job with taking the half hour and cutting out some of the stuff where if you had the original series, it's like 5 minutes of Kirk fighting. And you're just like, not necessary. So if you shave all that stuff down, it kind of, you get the heart of the story, which these seem to be.
Well, shall we talk about episode 17, The Pirates of Orion, or Orion, if you want to say it wrong, like they do here. Written by Howard Weinstein. This is the first episode of season 2, I should say.
Yes.
While Spock lies ill, Orion pirates hijack the drug shipment desperately needed to save his life. The one time when Spock is not immune, where he's actually like the only one who's biologically compromised. I like that, the reversal, the subversion of the Spock trope.
Yeah. This is also where we get a lot of Dr. McCoy racism towards Vulcans.
Yeah.
Like at the end, it's like, you have to admit it, being a human would have been better. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, if you were to just replace being white or something in there, then it's like, oh, Doc.
Yeah, that's a little icky.
Yeah. Just those
but you also see how much they actually care for each other at this one. So it's kind of interesting. It's got the different spectrum of his emotions towards Spock.
As a premise, I like the straightforward suspense of it. They're in a hurried, mission to meet up with a ship that has, among other things that it's carrying, this cure for Spock, and the ship gets jacked by the Orions, who get kind of fleshed out a little bit. I guess kind of keying off the end of the dude in Journey to Babel, right?
Yeah.
Because he kills himself, or does he? Yeah, he does kill himself in that. And they made that an Orion cultural thing. If they're gonna fail, they kill themselves. Which I actually did not know that anybody had really picked up on that. Did they do that in Enterprise when they showed up?
No, this is kind of like the weirdest presentation of the Orions, and it was something that
weird colored skins and
they're not quite the fact that they're called Orions and they look wrong. And I kind of want to think of them as another species, but they're clearly the same people that were in Journey to Babel. So you can't,
they get
from
the
southern continent or something like that. They're just they're slightly different Orions. They have an accent. They have different skin color.
This is a weird thing to mention maybe, but I wanted to mention that the thing that Spock has was it choriocytosis or something like that. It's one of those things that sound, for the animated series where, really just all they needed to say was he's got space sickness. I appreciate when they go that extra mile and have something that actually sounded very real. It reminded me of watching the Trouble with Tribbles and how Quadro Triticale has that strange but almost authentic sounding, name you might have for a strain of grain. Right. and I just, it's those little details are kind of nice sometimes.
And, earlier you were talking about how the show is so different from what comes before it and what comes after it. This was, being the first episode of the second season, was showcased in, they used to do those cartoon showcases on Friday nights to show you what was coming up for the new cartoon.
The preview night.
Yeah. And it had Jimmy Osmond, and he was a carnival barker, and he was singing these songs, and you had, it was Sigmund and the Sea Monster. And it's
oh man.
Yeah, and then it's he made some rhyme up about Star Trek. He's and Star Trek, and then they cut to it, and it's just he's going to die if we don't do this. It's and then he starts reading off the Babel conference rules and stuff. I'm well, that's a tonal shift. And then they come back, and it's and it's the Munsters. Da, 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 da. So it's just this sandwiched in between. It's that is the weirdest episode to highlight.
I did not. I mean, this is a little bit. It was a bit before my time. But I did not know that they were doing those preview nights back then. That's actually kind of cool because I remember fondly looking forward to those nights.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that they was it do you think it was overall, even though it didn't fit the episode, was it a good scene to show, or should they have shown something with more action or something?
I think they probably should have shown something with more action. Maybe on the surface when they're wrestling.
Yeah,
something more towards the end, something that wasn't so plot heavy. I mean. Obviously adults were putting this together, so maybe they were trying to, signal to parents that, hey, here's something you can watch as well. But it just, you watch it and you're just it feels like you're just thrown into your brakes are put on and then you take off again and just okay. So
right, it's kind of like the cliche of Star Trek in some ways versus Star Wars, where it's oh, this is the one where they sit around in conference rooms and talk. And unfortunately, that is what they showed.
Yeah. But his life was in danger, so that was something.
Yeah, that's true. There's a pretty sort of dramatic quality to that. And I did like the, by the way, the look of the Orion ship in this. It reminded me of, like, what would become, I guess, 70s and 80s video games like Space Invaders or Galaga or something like that, where they look like those little sort of head-on, two-dimensional views of, like, little ships that look almost like bugs.
Kind of like the ship in How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth that we'll get to in a moment.
Yeah, although that ship's crazier, it's pretty cool.
We should talk about how season 2 worked, as it was only 6 episodes, because they would just they would just drop a new one in to reruns of the first season.
And that's how they did cartoons in general. That wasn't just Star Trek. So that was pretty much a lot of those series back then. Because they didn't think kids would actually understand that there was a rerun. They were like, oh, they won't know the difference. Like, every kid knew the difference. It's like, I've seen this already. So, and it was also, at this point, Dorothy had left. The director had changed. And they were given, like, Bob and the group of people who were doing the illustrations kind of were given more free reign. They almost just became the showrunners as far as, like, putting things together. And if you notice, the ships become a lot more kind of out there. There's in the last episode, you have like an asymmetrical design where it's different on the left than on the right, which I think none of those things would have happened had there been a lot more oversight. The Dramian ship in Albatross, all these things are just really interesting that compared to what they would have been in season 1, I think.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the quality drops a little bit in season 2. Just things seem just a little bit off.
A little bit. There's also some new they aren't reusing the animation quite as much in places, which is interesting.
Oh, because I guess they had like a new budget with the new season, so they could do a bit more.
Probably add some more stuff in. Yeah,
makes sense. Y'all want to talk about the next episode? Would have been season 2, episode 2, Belm, written by David Gerald. Speaking of the father of the Tribbles himself, Ari Ben Belm, an erratic observer of the planet Pandro, secretly watches the crew of the USS Enterprise to determine whether the Federation is ready to open diplomatic relations with his advanced species.
This is a weird episode.
It is weird. This is part of like that season 2 stuff. It's like, oh, this is not quite as good as season 1, I don't think.
This was originally going to be an original series, a TOS episode. So this was something that was slated for live action and shelved, and then David brought it back for TOS or TAS.
I briefly looked at like the notes on Memory Alpha, and there was a fair amount of them, and it seemed like the script went through a lot, maybe. Like Roddenberry would want this, and then other people would want this, and like David Gerald maybe rewrote it a number of times. Or
there was not really a godlike creature, I don't think, in the first drafts. But like Gene liked that for being like a secular humanist. He had a lot of thoughts about like overwhelming or big powers in the sky.
I'm kind of with them, and yet the use kind of bordered on like fetishistic maybe.
It felt like, oh, this is very similar, and the creatures or the alien god sort of felt like the companion from
Metamorphosis.
The original series. Metamorphosis with Cochrane. Just like, oh,
it kind of looks the same with like the rainbowy light effect.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if they're somehow related.
There are a fair number of glowing gods in Star Trek or godlike aliens.
Yeah.
As the episode was going along, I was trying to figure out like what their moral was attempting to be, and I was like, is this an allegory of Vietnam as they get trapped in the jungle and all of their technology can't allow them to overcome these Aboriginal people, and then they have to, and then they do the thing where they're like, all right, we're just going to leave these people alone. And I was like, I don't think that was intended, maybe, but
I think it's too many revisions, and there wasn't actually anything that it's like it's a Rorschach test at this point. I think you get to find what you can pull out of it.
Once the god showed up, I was like, I don't know what's happening. I'm just going to stop with the analysis.
Well, I talk about the title character, Belm, who I hate him.
Colony creature.
I hate that creature.
He's very frustrating.
Yeah, and I know
he's
meant to be kind of he's meant to be annoying at the beginning when he like beams them into the water, but then like he jumps down there and his body starts splitting in two, and it's like, it's so weird. And then like his arm flies off and his head flies off, and you can tell it's like all the different parts that they would animate separately, like the way that he's split up. I wish that he was like more of like a goo monster that would
the way it was described
segment
originally was not like that. I mean, they didn't have floating parts to him. It was like it made more sense the way that he came apart.
At the end, when he says, "I guess I'm just a big failure, and I need to basically die. I need to like separate my colony." I wouldn't have talked him out. Like Kirk is talking him out of it. I would have let him like go through with it.
All right. That's
Where's your
culture.
humanism, Fatheree? What did Trek teach you? Nothing.
Hey, he would live as a bunch of different separate things that hopefully would never reform into like a big asshole like that again.
You know what? He was successful as like a pickpocket.
That's true.
There was kind of a recurring theme through all of these. It's like if you're a failure and you're not human, you will somehow want to kill yourself. And then we have to stop you from doing that because your life is worth something. So that
I don't know if it was that like I mean, not to keep bringing up Vietnam weirdly, but it had to have been on the mind. And was it just like a national bit of a malaise there? You know, I was just thinking about how MASH came out in that era, and of course it was about the Korean War, but the theme song is called "Suicide is Painless."
Yeah.
So I don't know why that kind of recurs as a motif, but it does.
That could be interesting. That it's like so under the subconscious of the whole culture that and it isn't until like decades later that you can go back. Oh, that's why this was
right.
So
not necessarily a cognizant plan, but just sort of something that was percolating in the subconscious.
It does kind of annoy me how many times Star Trek, and I guess the animated series itself, has to rely on these type of like prideful warrior races. Like the Kzinti had a bit of that, but the Klingons do that a lot, the Romulans do that a lot, and it's like, oh no, like the score is like, oh, my reputation has been injured, and this is a great disgrace, and I've dishonored my people. And they kind of lean onto that a lot, to where like everyone who's not Federation kind of comes off as that.
Well, you have to blame Japan for making the samurai so fascinating because they have endlessly influenced us.
There is a little bit of like Japanese and the Kzinti, how like they're not allowed to have a military, they can only have like a police force. That's kind of like post World War II Japan. But let's move on to the next episode, The Practical Joker, written by Chuck Minville. After passing through a strange space energy cloud, the Enterprise's computer gains an artificial intelligence that is relentlessly bent on making practical jokes on the crew.
The voice sounded weird, but was that Majel Barrett throughout?
Yeah,
I believe
just
so.
Kind of putting on a voice.
Weird
I think this episode was kind of a slog for me, but I did like some of the weird, like seeing George or hearing George Takei and some of those other ones laugh, just doing his, just like.
He has a weird laugh when they're
I love it.
The nitrous oxide, and he's laughing in their holodeck, which is cool to see the rec room as like a primitive holodeck.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements in the show that are interesting where they don't really all make a whole great episode together.
Mm-hmm. Fatheree, you had, I think, I'm sure, mentioned before the recreation room as a proto holodeck, but I had never seen it, and I was like, oh wow, it is literally exactly the holodeck, right down to problems occurring as a plot device.
The very first holodeck episode is a holodeck error
gone wrong. Yeah. It reminded me
of. And it
has
has like the little, the not arch, but the thing that comes in the middle if you like call. Like the pedestal or whatever, like you see that in Voyager and a couple other things. It's just like it's got that, and it runs on tapes apparently, but okay. It
looked the visuals looked cool, like when they like reprogram it and like these blue skies appear. I was just like, oh, that's nice painting. They just it conveyed the holodeck idea a good was it like 12, 13 years before it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And Gene had talked with like the father of holography, and he had said something, it's like, oh, I want to do something like that, and that's how that got incorporated. But he had also talked about wanting to do it in real life at one point, having some sort of room on the Enterprise that did that, but they just didn't have the effects budget.
Yeah, I think.
I feel like it was.
They wanted to do that in season 3 at one point.
Yeah.
Before Jane stepped away from the show, they had talked about doing that in season 3. I don't know what episode it would have been used in, but
yeah.
The structure-wise, this kind of reminded me of what's the episode where Kirk is split into his evil half?
Oh,
The Enemy Within.
Enemy Within.
yeah.
Doesn't that have as the B plot that Sulu and those guys are trapped down on that planet below, freezing to death?
Yeah.
With that weird dog.
Yeah, and they had to use the phaser to heat the rocks and all that stuff. Anyway, it just reminded me of it. The ticking clock of sort of a survivalist thing. They're like, we got to get this solved.
The Romulans were back in their D7s, looking cool.
Yep. This is the last time we see Romulans until the neutral zone in television.
Right. But yeah, I always like seeing
even.
those guys in there. I noticed that in the end, so the much of this episode, just for anybody who hasn't seen it, is the computer messing with them at first, and these sort of increasing problems of it as they go from kind of just silly
Jokey.
practical jokes of food fell on me and stuff like that to gravity's not working, life support's not working. And I did notice that they, much like the Tribbles, they kind of pawn the problem off on their enemies, and it's a little bit of a kind of ending. How often do they do that?
No wonder the Romulans and the Vulcans don't like. I mean,
I
the
wouldn't
Klingons
be.
don't like us.
I wouldn't be wild about the Federation.
And of course, this is the episode that gives us Kirk is a jerk.
Yes.
Right.
The replicator. I'm assuming it's he gets his fresh clothes from somewhere,
right?
And we're assuming that it's some sort of replicated thing, and it has "Kirk is a jerk" written on the back of his shirt, which is great.
He's like, is that the point where he's like, it's a little bit like when Scotty, the Enterprise, is insulted in Trouble with Tribbles, where he's like, it's gone too far.
Yeah,
and they're all turning on each other like, you did this.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's all funny. Haha. Oh, wait, no, this is not funny. So, okay. We have to solve this.
Speaking of Scotty, the food slot throws food all over him, kind of like what happens to Tilly in the Short Trek episode.
Yep. We did a side by side, and they even look kind of the same, food slots and stuff. So pretty cool.
Oh, and when Kirk is trying to trick the computer, when he's like, "Oh no, please don't fly us back into the cloud," he's overacting.
Yes.
You can tie that into the Wrath of Khan when he is overacting there, when he screams Khan. People always reference that, but they forget that Kirk is putting on a show for Khan to make him think that he is deserted there, because he had that whole scheme with Spock of how the Enterprise is going to come around and pick them up.
Just to clarify, you're talking about Kirk, the character. Shatner is also known to be a larger-than-life actor. Is the charitable version. Some people would say an overactor, but he's certainly a larger-than-life presence. But yes, Kirk was very deliberately misleading in these cases.
Yeah. Kirk is an overactor himself. And just like,
but he's doing it. He's doing it with intentionally, I guess.
Yeah. It's also sort of an echo of the, Kirk talks a computer into dying, sort of, a variant of that. Okay,
well, let's talk about the next episode, Albatross, written by Dario Finelli. Following a mission to the planet Dromia, Dr. McCoy is held prisoner, accused of mass genocide caused by a deadly plague committed 19 years earlier during a previous expedition. When the Enterprise attempts to investigate, it too becomes infected. This is the one that felt the most timely, in my opinion, where everyone is coming down with this disease.
But we don't.
And they want to blame
really cool shades of...
Yeah. They want to blame a notable physician for it. What relevance could that have?
Well, like the Dromians, they're a cool design.
I agree. They're some of my favorite aliens, especially the ones that are the survivors. But also, I thought this had some of my favorite paintings, both their home planet, had these really vivid, beautiful colors, like almost a little psychedelic. I always kind of like when they do the psychedelic colors. Yeah. And then the plague-swept world of Dromia 2 is really cool looking. I feel like somebody got to have some post-apocalyptic fun with those skeletal buildings and all of that stuff.
The Dramians too had a lot of just sketches that led up to that, so you can kind of see the evolution of where they started from, and there's a little bit of that 1970s fantasy sort of element to it.
Yeah,
like
some of those
be gnomes maybe or something like that, but then they kind of like evolve, and I really like what they ended up with because it feels humanoid but like different, almost Kelpian in some ways as far as
there's some slightly skeletal elements to their face. And also they have that sort of weird thing where their arms or their legs and maybe their arms, like maybe just the legs, elongate at the bottom, like they have larger from the knee down. Their legs are larger. But yeah, the other thing about them is that although James Doohan and like Nichelle Nichols voiced a lot of aliens, this one I thought was I don't know who voiced him, but was it Commander Demos? How do you say it?
It was one of the Filmation heads.
Yeah, he kind of stood out to me as having a serious presence to him and not kind of affecting a sort of I'm an alien voice. Yeah, he has a cool kind of commanding voice, and I thought his character had some, a decent bit of nuance to it. We talked about this with Rich a little, is that I sort of like how these episodes where essentially whatever the antagonists might be during the episode, it's usually based in sort of more of a misunderstanding, and they come to some accord at the end. And this is one of those cases where, okay, yeah, they were maybe behaving a little bit heinously with their sort of kangaroo court and all that, but they do, I think this guy lends them some sort of depth that I don't know if the writing necessarily showed it, but he brought it to the character.
I really like this one. Like, to me, it felt more like a season 1 episode. It was this one stands out in season 2 for me, and I love that it ultimately becomes a story of Spock trying to save Dr. McCoy.
Yeah.
McCoy, who is, even he himself is filled with some doubt that reminded me just a little bit of like the one sort of notable scene in Star Trek, was it 5, I guess, where he's reminiscing about not being able to save his father. And here he's like, maybe I did screw up. Maybe I did accidentally cause this plague. He's like obviously such a moral guy that he's willing to like try and look into himself and see if that's possible that he screwed up.
Right.
So it's a fairly deep idea, even if it's conveyed in a kind of brisk way.
There's also when they're having their McCoy and Spock are talking, there's like, you get the almost line. It's like I'm a doctor, Spock. A doctor. And you're like, what? But you're not a what? And you didn't fill it in. It was just like it was like that. I almost feel like they did that on purpose, because you're just like, oh, that's weird.
that shows you how serious. That shows you how serious he is here. It's like he doesn't have time to like think of something else.
But it does have one. I thought this would be a great one to take out of context. Where is it? I guess it's Spock. He's like, Captain, you're blue.
Yeah.
just that's their visual descriptor for the plague.
The color changing.
Yeah.
The Saurian virus. So it's tied into Linus from Star Trek Discovery, who sneezes on people in the turbo lift. So.
Yeah, put a mask on it, Jesus.
Yeah, that's
Kirk saying set up an immediate quarantine. So we've got we got quarantine speak and.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It's eerie to watch episodes like this and have it relate so notably to the present. Pandemics and big viral outbreaks, at least for most of my life, barring sort of Ebola outbreaks, which broadly did not intersect too strongly with the United States. It felt like something like I'm like, oh, well, that's something that's an older problem, or unfortunately a problem for countries that are less prosperous than the United States. But it's like, oh, there's the pandemic of 1917, and there's been outbreaks here and there, and Ebola breaks out here and there around the world at times. But it does in some ways. I have not in 40 plus years had to deal with that, and then suddenly here it is, and all these old stories that were written by people who might have been closer to the pandemic of 1917. You're like, oh. No wonder they were utterly mortified and terrified of these ideas.
This also makes me wonder, with there being such a recurring trope of Star Trek dealing with like these medical issues and a lot of like, oh, there's like some widespread viral outbreak or something like that, and we have to find a cure. Will future Star Trek writers even want to continue these types of stories now that we've kind of just lived through it?
Yeah.
It's
also,
not for a little bit, I bet. I think there probably will need some reflection.
Let's retire it. Let's retire it for a while.
And also, now that this has happened, anything that we've been looking back on this time period, none of the characters ever mention this or refer to it because it didn't happen. So, there wasn't like there's World War III, the eugenics war, the COVID-19 outbreak. There's no sort of big vibe. Maybe that's all just lumped together with World War III in their brain. It's just sort of like what part of that leads up to the war or something.
Let's move on to these final 2 episodes. We have season 2, episode 5, How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, written by Russell Bates and David Wise. The Enterprise encounters a being that once visited the ancient people of Earth. I mentioned at the top of the show how the animated series often brings back flying, winged, bird-like monsters or snake-like serpent dragon monsters.
I like when they screech.
This is the combination of both. When we get Kukulkan, who is a winged bird snake monster. And I think of him as like the final boss of the animated series, because this is so near the end.
I remember as a kid I would say I was cuckoo for Kukulkan, like the Cocoa Puffs thing.
I felt bad for them having to say that over and over when Quetzalcoatl is kind of a cooler sounding name, or easier anyway.
I like Kukulkan. I like to say that.
It's a tongue twister for me.
My girlfriend's annoyed at me because after watching this recently, I keep talking to her about Kukulkan. I told her that whenever we go back to Star Trek Las Vegas, I want to cosplay as Kukulkan.
Man, that would be a great multiplayer, like a 2-person one of those costumes things.
Oh yeah.
We get our Native American crew member, Ensign Walking Bear.
So he hadn't been in a previous episode. It was just for this episode, so he could kind of be the expert on the topic, somewhat stereotypically.
Well, he's better than the expert was for Voyager, at least. So it's actually written by a real Native American.
Right.
So that was pretty great.
And I didn't know that until I was poking around about it, that was the case.
Yeah, and I think the original drafts didn't really have that in there, but since they were both working as a team, basically he was a writer, Russell Bates, and David Wise was more of the animation person. He understood how that worked, so they worked together as a team. And I think that's when David was like, we should really bring in some of your history because that fits Star Trek so well and it's kind of interesting. And that's when that kind of diverged. And then I don't remember exactly how the first draft was. David Wise was looking for, he had like the original sketches that he drew of the ship to give to the writers because this is what they had in their head. And unfortunately he passed away. Russell Bates also passed away while we're making this book. So these two, I'm glad that we have the interview from David in here, but it's just, you get to know these people after what, you talk with them on Facebook. That's one good thing about social media is just sort of even that playing field of getting to know the people who create the things that you like.
For sure. And I imagine there's some people who might have been sort of actors or writers who might have been marginalized a little bit or just kind of forgotten in the shuffle of time who can be rediscovered or acknowledged and honored for their contributions.
Yeah. I think that's why a lot of people really wanted to participate in the book because it's just like they felt that portion of what they had done had just sort of like dropped off the face of the earth. Especially when you got Gene like, oh no, this isn't canon or whatever.
Right.
So
well, thank you so much for the book and like letting the stories get out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That was not meant to be a self-advertising thing. But no, I did it. That's why I did the podcast because it was just like I don't want these stories to just disappear as the people disappear. Because then, as we know, you ask one person something, they don't like you. It's best to get as many concepts stories of what happened as possible so you can kind of glue together the middle ground in your head of what actually happened. Because if you leave it down to one person, it's really biased.
For sure.
Even though they're not trying to be. That's just how it turns out.
This episode, Fatheree, I assume was like influenced also by that kind of, what was it? The Chariots of the Gods sort of popular.
Yeah, which I don't think Gene didn't like that idea that like aliens taught us how to build pyramids and make the Mayan calendar and stuff. He always wanted to promote like humans as being like these capable, intelligent beings that figured all this stuff out on our own. So I'm not really sure how this got in under the radar, unless almost the last episode, if he was just kind of so backed off at this point that he didn't take the time to give any notes back, or what happened.
We know more about like the first season of his interaction. It's like I kind of feel like the second season was on autopilot, and even David Gerald said something to the effect of like Star Trek scripts at that point were writing themselves, so it's like they might have just been, that was good. I don't know. That's not very Gene, because Gene likes to change literally everything, because obviously Bem was really picked, so maybe he picked his battles. It was just sort of like specific ones.
I mean, it was still kind of that Gene Roddenberry idea, like from Who Mourns for Adonais, of outgrowing a sort of, a mythic past and outgrowing the gods.
Right. Yeah. That's why he liked it. That's why he let this stuff slide, I guess.
That's probably.
Instead of Chariots of Fire, I was thinking, speaking of Nickelodeon, but Legend of the Hidden Temple.
What's that?
That game show they used to have on Nickelodeon where like kids had to go through like all. It was very like Indiana Jones type.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I particularly saw this, but I probably vaguely remember it. I've seen. I think I can think of shows like that.
Kukulkan is just like a really weird design, and it's very awkward to watch like this conversation with a giant snake bird who will occasionally hiss at the characters.
Don't try and force your anthropomorphism on him, Fatheree.
It reminds me how of in the Jihad, the Vidala cat person, another cat in Star Trek the animated series, but when she would like roar to like turn on their like little holographic projector, it was so weird and jarring, and I actually like it there. For whatever reason, the Kukulkan hissing that Kirk and McCoy and Scotty and Walking Bear, it just kind of weirds me out a little bit. But I do like the use of the Capellan power cat here.
Yeah,
because we have to have cats, we have to have bird monsters, we have to have snake monsters. This episode has all three. Checks all those boxes.
And Capella, because that was in the original series, and then it'll be in the next episode. We have a flower from Capella.
Yeah, weird to do that back to back.
Yeah.
They, one of the things that this is like a lot of the season 2 episodes, this one is a little I did think it was, if nothing else, fascinating that when they're in these sort of holographic ancient city or whatever, the stuff that they have to do was very much like a modern video game puzzle, or a 90s and onward video game puzzle, where you have to line up statues and the light bounces around and amplifies and all that.
That's Legends of the Hidden Temple.
Did they do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like those types, like
okay. I thought they were just leaping over water and climbing.
There's like a puzzle element to it too.
Oh, okay.
I didn't really.
They should bring that back then. I wanna watch that show. I want to be in that show.
Look it up on YouTube.
All right, I will.
I'm sure there's clips of it.
Also, a little bit of the Move Along Home from Deep Space Nine.
I'm the only person. I'm not the only. I know one other person who likes that episode besides me.
I don't mind. I'm not. That's my unpopular Star Trek take. I'm like, I don't hate it. I mean, I like the concept of it too. It's sort of like these people just interact with the world through games, and they're like, why don't you? Like, they don't understand that you don't understand it's a game. Like, why are you all freaking out? They're not dead. I mean,
right.
I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting. This is also the first time that Star Trek won an Emmy for anything.
Yeah. Weird that this is the one that won the Emmy for Star Trek, but I'll take it.
Sure.
Yeah. It was, I think, up against Captain Kangaroo and I believe another Filmation. I think it was Fat Albert. Yeah. And
Captain Kangaroo got owned.
Yeah. Well, there's this story that Lou's son was walking around and had heard that Captain Kangaroo had actually got it. So Lou Scheimer's like, well, I'm not going to get up. And so he just drank a lot. And he was like sauced. And they were it was like the first and only time it was on a boat in like New York Harbor. They did the daytime Emmys out there. And they're like, ha, we have you all captured here. Like, it felt very weird. Like I watched them the opening. It was just like, oh, okay. And so he gets up and he's just like, clearly, like the woman who like hands out the awards and stuff just sort of like guides him up there because he was just going to fall.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I think he forgot. That's when he forgot Al Sutherland,
who directed all the season 1 episodes before
Yes.
Bill Reed came on to do season 2.
Yeah.
See, I did my homework. I read your book. So now we'll talk about the final episode of Star Trek The Animated Series, Season 2, Episode 6, The Counter Clock Incident, written by Fred Bronson, who was credited as John Culver, because I think I talked about that last week, but he was an NBC publicist and thought he had to use a different name on the credits. But he's a cool dude who talks to me on Twitter, so that's awesome.
Nice.
And
he's a musician, but I mean, music is his big thing, really.
Oh yeah, and he wrote some TNG as well.
Yep, The Game and Menage a Troy.
In this episode, when the Enterprise enters a negative universe, former Captain Robert April saves the ship, and as the crew age backwards. So is this the first time we ever hear Robert April, or had that been used in any of like the novels or anything before this?
It had been used in drafts, and if you were reading like the behind the scenes books, like the Making of Star Trek or whatever, you would have seen it there. But otherwise, no. This is the first time that he was fleshed out as a character. Well, as fleshed out as the character gets here. But yeah.
And then mentioned again in Star Trek Discovery.
Yes.
And
the Kelvin universe too, so we got him there.
His sort of storyline in this is something that Trek has explored a fair number of times with age, is just the notion of being put out to pasture or being pasture prime. Kirk himself has embodied this in at least a few movies, and but in a way, this was one of the earlier cases of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird. The retirement age for an ambassador is 75. When I think we clearly at some point see like admirals that look older than, or at least close to 75.
Well, Father, they were just getting out of the 60s. They didn't trust those old people.
Oh yeah, was the retirement age determined by the Aquan youths?
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, no, I think even like in 1973, like somebody who was 75 could still be like, a president or something. So I don't know why that was a weird age to choose. I think they could have said like 95, and they were actually, they look great for their age because it's, the future.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just like the kids of, that where we expect to be watching Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
To them, 75 might as well be, Merlin the magician.
Exactly.
Although, ironically, I should say that because Merlin, of course, historically, or like many versions, aged backwards.
And that's backwards.
That is the premise of this episode.
Yes. In fact, when they recently announced that they thought they found a negative universe, I was like, ha! And
it's on.
And then they're like, no, we didn't really, because that was just, badly interpreted data. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah.
I love the kind of whimsical sci-fi here that is probably more associated with something like Doctor Who than Star Trek, but the white void with the black stars and the novas that birth suns and just the all of that, like the ships moving backwards. It's kind of a ridiculous visual, but it's
kind of pop science fiction where, like, if you scrutinize the details, well, it doesn't quite make sense, but like, as a pop idea of just like inverting expectations, it's kind of neat.
And you get the dramatic ticking clock of everyone is going to age backwards into babies. And I like when they do start turning into little kids, and then you get like that one shot of them as babies.
Yeah.
It's like it makes me think like Star Trek babies instead of Muppet babies.
Also, baby Kirk was like losing his hair. Like tell the adult Kirk was going to need a toupee, but with a way baby.
Was that the animators messing with him?
I don't know, maybe.
Well, if you age backwards, like a newborn baby is either very close to completely bald or actually completely bald. So
hopefully,
if you do age backwards, you still get bald.
What was I going to say? There's a the previous episode had a Shakespeare quote in it, And there's a famous Shakespeare speech about the 7 ages of man from, I think, As You Like It. And they refer to in the seventh age, the final age, they refer to old age as the second childhood. Mm-hmm. And that they cover both ends of the spectrum in this. You got the sort of, I don't want to say doddering, because he's supposed to be in command of all his faculties, but he's an older guy, and then you have literally become kids. And why are they aging so fast in it? I forget.
Not explained.
Okay.
It's like,
yeah,
we have 25 minutes to do this.
Because, presumably, the other inhabitants of this would, take, if they're born at 75 and die at 0, they still span 75 years doing it, right?
Yeah. That had actually been explained in an earlier draft and edited out. It was something to do with their proximity to a black hole type thing. So it was not only was it going backwards, but it was also relative, and it was just accelerated.
Sure.
And
I can buy that in this kind of, that's actually a pretty thought out response. I would have bought it if you just said, it's just a weird effect of going from one universe to the other is that it accelerates it. But that's actually a pretty cool version.
Yeah, I like that. I wasn't aware of that.
It's a little bit of relativity thrown in there.
Yeah. So this is what I think is weird, is they said that they couldn't do environmental suits in the animated series because they didn't want to animate all these additional character models for everyone.
They made babies.
Yeah, explain that one to me.
Because all they would have done is the environmental suits once, and then they could have reused it because they reused everything across the board.
You just swap out the face, whoever's under the helmet.
True. Yeah.
Fatheree, you saw what happened. They used babies once, and the show was over.
That is what happened
at the very end.
But yeah, it is cool to actually see Robert April, because he's typically just a name that you see in the novels and stuff.
His wife is prominently featured as well.
Oh yeah, she was the I guess the chief medical officer on the Enterprise when he was captain. That would be cool to see them. You have this husband-wife duo, and they're captain and doctor.
Yeah.
Kind of like what the novels did with Troy and Riker, I guess, in the Titan novels.
Or Picard and Crusher, even.
Yeah.
They could have been the Nick and Nora of the Spaceways.
Yeah. Fred said that if he had wrote it today, he would, instead of calling her Mrs. April, they would have Dr. April. Dr. McCoy should have called her Dr. April. And he's just looking back now, that's not something that
makes sense.
Would have done. But it was
I did notice she had this very raspy kind of old lady voice when she was 75-ish or whatever she was. And then also when she was 25.
She's just got that sort of, what is it, Lauren Bacall or
that
Kathleen
sort of
Turner
husky, whiskey voice.
Yeah. Robert April seems like he's got a bit of a British accent, which seems to be they bring that into books and stuff like that. So whatever Scotty was, or James Doohan was doing, kind of a continental accent or something.
No, two things about the end. One is, again, this is another case of using the transporter to fix everything, or restore people to their original age, the Lorelei signal. And
yeah, two, before TNG did it all the time too. So it's sort of prototype of restoring people and turning them into kids or rascals.
The other thing is, I don't buy them deciding not to stay young. I know that was kind of the meaningful moment of no, we lived a good life. We don't need to do it again. But no one is gonna trade away their an opportunity to be young again. I don't buy that.
Well, spoilers, I guess, for the end of Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, right.
That when what happens to him happens, he chooses to have a natural lifespan instead of adding on time. No, add on time if you're gonna come on. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with
that
you.
For him, but
also the fact that he decided for her was kind of annoying.
Yeah.
That's
definitely an artifact of the day.
Yeah.
Weirdly though, they do kind of start making out, and then the camera cuts away. So we're both young and good looking again. Yeah. And we're never gonna look like this again. So fill in the blank what you think they did.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. No, it was. It's funny because it was never, there was no, this is the final episode or anything like that. So there was no reason for this to be the last one, but
I
it
suppose
feels
it's kind
like
of interesting, like a little poetic, maybe to go out with the first Enterprise captain in
that's
its
what I
way.
mean. It's like it's got a nice little cap to it in some ways.
Well, that is all of Star Trek the Animated Series. We've now covered all of it.
9 hours later.
It is something, like I mentioned, is often overlooked. So I do encourage people, if you have any fondness for the original series, you really need to check out the animated series. And you can take it, more seriously than a typical Saturday morning cartoon. It does have a lot of substance there, and it is just as legitimate as any other Star Trek show. I would not have figured that out if it wasn't for this man, Aaron Harvey, who is taking the time to celebrate the show with us. As we approach Star Trek's return to animation in a few weeks.
Yes.
So, Aaron, I definitely want to ask you about Star Trek Lower Decks. Are you excited to see Star Trek get animated again?
I was excited to hear about an animated series, and I'll walk you through like my sort of roller coaster of how I felt about it. It was just like, yay, animation. It's like, oh, it's a comedy. I have literally spent half of my life trying to convince people that animated Star Trek isn't a joke, and now it is literally a joke. Just like I just was really not sure how to process that. And then it was like Rick and Morty, a show that I never could get into, and like, all right. And so it was just like, I'm not going to be those people who are like, I hate it right away, and not give it a chance. But it was like, I wasn't like jumping up and down thrilled, and people would ask me and I'm just like, yeah, that sounds great. I just didn't want to like give a whole lot of detail because I was afraid I was going to spiral into sounding like, I didn't want this to happen. And then in the meantime, in between that, I did a Star Trek an improvised Star Trek show, which in improv, no matter what you do, it's going to be funny because you're making up on the spot. And our show is called Night Shift, and there's a regular show at Impro Theater here in Los Angeles called The Improvised Generation. So it's the USS McGinley. It's a Galaxy-class starship. And we were the night shift, the people who boldly go where no one's gone before 7 a.m. So, and so we had a little bit more of like a funny vibe to it to start with. And, so as we started doing things, I'm like, oh, this can still be because we really wanted it to be Star Trek. We were all Star Trek fans. We didn't want it to be like making fun of Star Trek, but there is humor built into that. And so I think as I went through that, I'm like, oh, okay, you can still have a very Star Trek show and still have it be funny. And then seeing the trailer that just came out, I'm like, except for a few things, like, yeah, I can totally see this. And there was a line in there that's like, we live on a spaceship. No one is dying from a spear wound. It's like something that could have came out of our show. It was just like, so I'm like, okay, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. There's some things that like, the singing the Blast Shield song, which is very funny, but it feels very humor that would happen between Buffy and World War III, but not after World War. Like in their universe, it doesn't seem like it was that kind of humor. I would probably have landed on more of a British, what is it? Sort of like humor related to the situational humor, as opposed to like the, I don't know, office workplace / goofy. But I think it's going to be good. Right now everybody needs something that's a little bit lighter anyway. I think I think we need some humor. So, and for all the people who said that Star Trek is too dark, this is the exact opposite of that. So
yeah.
So
in a lot of ways, it should be refreshing because it will be it'll be a big shift away from Discovery and Picard, and a lot of the aesthetics are so spot on to what a lot of people were really asking for. With like they want a post Nemesis, very Rick Bermanish looking era, and they're going to get that with this. Yeah,
it all feels very of the universe, and you watch it, and you're like, okay, the ship looks realistic. The stuff that it's all cartoonized, but it's sort of like what they did with the animated series, the original. I'm hoping they do a time travel episode where they end up in Kirk's time, and then it's using that style, which I think would be really hilarious to have. Like I
would be super into that.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to happen, but it would be really funny.
I think I guess it remains to be seen. We may get this more out of trailers as to what the dramatic component will be, like how deeply they'll dive into that. I think there'll be some, but I have no idea how much.
Yeah.
I hope that there's a good bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that it can still be funny, and then there can still be heart. It doesn't have to be like, maybe it's not the most dramatic thing, but it could be more of this person is always scared to go on an away mission, and then we finally got him to go on an away mission, and he's not as scared anymore. There could be that kind of drama that isn't necessarily like the ship's going to blow up or something. So,
but Aaron, what I really appreciate about just listening to you in podcasts and following you on social media a little bit is that you're a very like fair like judge of Star Trek. Whenever like you'll critique them, you'll talk about like things you don't like, but you never do it in like this like hateful negative way, and you're always like very supportive of like the creative people that go into that. And I look up to that. I try to take a similar approach when I'm discussing this stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I also being a graphic designer and somebody who's, I mean, I technically work now on Star Trek things, like not the show, but background pieces, or I mean, the world. They're people just like us. I mean, they're not like some weird entity that doesn't have a life that is just like cranking out Star Trek. I mean, these are people who have, families, and it is an example. Like one person said, I hope everybody on Discovery loses their job. I'm just like, you really do? Because like, think of all the people involved in that show who have families and stuff. And I had that conversation with somebody, and towards the end, I think I kind of got them to think about like, you might not like it, but wishing someone to lose their job is kind of horrible. And you apparently aren't watching the show that you supposedly love, because that is not a Star Trek sort of response.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why, like, I never even want to like talk about shows I don't like saying like I hope they get canceled, because like a lot of people will lose. Like, I don't watch the Orville, but I have zero desire to see it get canceled. Like a lot of people are working on that show hoping that it runs for 7-8 seasons and they can put their kids through college. So. Yep. But
so Star Trek
those are the Star Trek TV ideals we have to try and live up to.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm always perfect on it, but I try.
None of us are. I mean, I'm sure I've said something that's like cringy at some point about the show or a show or whatever. But yeah.
Well, that's the point of Star Trek. That's what Kirk said to the Megans and the Magics of Megas 2 is that we've learned to do better. We've learned to improve ourselves, and we will continue to do that. And
don't
Aaron,
have to disassemble ourselves like Bem.
Yes, you're right. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and talking about this with us. It was a blast.
Great having you.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
And thank you for the book. Everyone should pick it up if you like the animated series. It is essential reading. It is beautifully laid out. And as far as moving forward, me and Dave will be back next week to talk about Star Trek Comic Con at home. I'm going to get some Lower Decks info and probably some Discovery Season 3 stuff. And shortly after that, we'll be covering Lower Decks week to week. And Aaron, just want to thank you again and say goodbye. Everyone listening and watching, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek, and follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.